I heard them through the fog of pain and medication. She's not our real daughter, my mother said, her voice cold and distant like I'd never heard before. My body was broken from the crash monitor's beeping as my life literally hung in the balance. The doctor was explaining the surgery I needed to survive. Through swollen eyes, I saw my father's hand gripping my mother's shoulder. "We're not paying for that," he said firmly. "We never legally adopted her anyway." My heart broke faster than my body had in that car. For 26 years since I was 6, they'd loved me. Or at least I thought they had. Now they were leaving me to die. They didn't know about my inheritance. They didn't know about the letter I'd written just yesterday. As they walked away and my consciousness faded, all I could think was they have no idea what's coming. I was born Vanessa Lynn Turner. My birth parents were Jack and Marie Turner, a young couple from a small town in Ohio. I have only vague memories of them. My dad's deep laugh, my mom's floral perfume bedtime stories about brave princesses. They died in a house fire when I was 5 years old. The official report called it faulty wiring. I survived only because I was staying overnight at a friend's house for a birthday party. With no living relatives willing to take me, I entered the foster care system. After several temporary placements, Martha and Richard Montgomery adopted me when I was 6. They lived in a beautiful, 2-story colonial home in suburban Pennsylvania with perfect landscaping and a swing set in the backyard. Martha was a high school English teacher, Richard an investment banker. They couldn't have children of their own, they told me, but they had so much love to give. I believed them. "You're our miracle," Martha would say, brushing my hair before school. Richard taught me how to ride a bike, his hands steady on the back of the seat until I found my balance. They threw elaborate birthday parties, enrolled me in ballet and piano lessons, took me to Disney World, and hung my artwork on the refrigerator. To all appearances, we were the perfect family. I excelled in school, particularly in math and art. This combination eventually led me to architecture. I graduated from Penn State with honors and worked at several prestigious firms before starting my own small architectural design company at 30. My parents beamed with pride at my graduation and the opening of my firm. At least I thought that's what those smiles meant. The first crack in our relationship appeared when I moved in with my college boyfriend Jason without getting married. Martha and Richard were deeply religious, though they'd never forced their beliefs on me. Still, their disappointment was palpable. When Jason and I broke up 2 years later, they seemed almost pleased. "God has better plans for you, sweetheart," Martha said. I dated occasionally after that, but focused primarily on my career. My firm, VLT Architectural Design, specialized in eco-friendly residential properties and was beginning to make a name for itself in Philadelphia and the surrounding suburbs. I bought a modest but beautiful craftsman-style home that I renovated myself. Life was good, if somewhat lonely at times. Then 3 months ago, everything changed. I received a certified letter from a law firm in Cincinnati. A woman named Eleanor Turner had died and named me as her sole beneficiary. Eleanor Turner, my biological grandmother, my father's mother. She had been searching for me for 25 years, the letter explained, but the adoption records were sealed. A private investigator she hired finally located me just weeks before she died of heart failure. Eleanor left me everything: $4,200,000, a house in Cincinnati, and a collection of family photos and heirlooms. There was a letter, too, telling me how much she regretted not finding me sooner, how proud my parents would have been of the woman I'd become. I was stunned, not just by the money, but by the connection to my birth family I'd thought was lost forever. When I called Martha and Richard to tell them, their reaction surprised me. "That's wonderful, darling," Martha exclaimed, her voice pitched higher than normal. "You must be so excited." "What exactly did she leave you?" Richard asked, cutting straight to the point. I told them about the inheritance, and their behavior shifted subtly. They began calling daily. Martha suggested lunch dates twice a week. Richard offered financial management advice unsolicited. They asked pointed questions about my will, my insurance policies, my business succession plans. "You need to be prepared for anything," Richard insisted during Sunday dinner at their house. "Have you updated your will since the inheritance?" "Actually, no," I admitted, watching his expression carefully. "I should probably do that." "Your mother and I should be your executors," he said a little too quickly. "We can handle everything if something happens to you." Martha nodded enthusiastically. Family takes care of family. Something about their sudden interest felt wrong. I made an appointment with my lawyer, Sam Weiss, for the following week to update my will, but not in the way my parents expected. The day before my appointment with Sam, I was organizing some papers for our meeting when I found a property tax bill that had been delivered to my house by mistake. It was addressed to Richard Montgomery, but the property wasn't their home. It was a small apartment complex I'd never heard them mention. Curious, I did some research online and discovered the complex was in foreclosure. Further digging revealed something shocking. My parents were deeply in debt. Their house had a second and third mortgage. Richard's investment firm had lost several major clients. There were tax liens against them. I sat back in my chair stunned. They were broke, completely broke, and suddenly very interested in my inheritance. That night, I wrote a letter detailing my suspicions and my recent discoveries. I sealed it in an envelope addressed to Sam with a note on the outside, open only in the event of my death or serious injury under suspicious circumstances. I would give it to him tomorrow at our meeting. I just never expected that tomorrow would change everything. The morning of my appointment with Sam dawned bright and clear. I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit with a silk blouse, gathered my documents, and headed out to my car, a silver Audi I'd purchased to celebrate landing my biggest client last year. I was preoccupied with thoughts of what I would tell Sam, how to phrase my concerns without sounding paranoid. My parents couldn't possibly wish me harm, could they? Maybe their financial troubles explain their strange behavior, nothing more sinister. Traffic was light as I merged onto the highway. I was about 15 minutes from downtown Philadelphia when it happened. I pressed my foot on the brake to slow for an upcoming exit, but nothing happened. The pedal went straight to the floor with no resistance. My car continued to accelerate. Panic surged through me. I pumped the brake repeatedly. Nothing. I tried the emergency brake. No response. I swerved to avoid a minivan horn blaring. The speedometer climbed 70, 80, 90 miles per hour. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I saw the curve coming, tried to navigate it at my dangerous speed. Physics had other plans. My car broke through the guardrail and went airborne. There was a moment of weightlessness, then the sickening crunch of metal and glass as the car rolled down the embankment. Pain exploded everywhere. The world went black. I woke to the rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors. Every inch of my body hurt. My left leg was suspended in a cast, my right arm immobilized. Bandages wrapped my torso. A tube ran down my throat, preventing me from speaking. A nurse noticed my open eyes. "You're awake," she said gently. "You've been in an accident. You're at Philadelphia General. I'm going to get the doctor." The doctor, a tall woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, explained my injuries: broken leg, fractured arm, 3 broken ribs, punctured lung, lacerated liver, concussion. I'd been unconscious for nearly 2 days. "I was lucky to be alive," she said. "We've contacted your emergency contacts," she added. "Your parents are on their way." I must have shown panic in my eyes because she paused, looking concerned. I couldn't speak to warn her, couldn't tell her not to leave me alone with them. Martha and Richard arrived an hour later. They looked the part of concerned parents perfectly. Martha's eyes red-rimmed Richard's face, drawn with worry. They hovered around my bed, Martha, stroking my hair back from my forehead. "Oh, my poor baby," she cooed. "You're going to be just fine." The doctor returned and asked to speak with them privately. I wanted to scream to beg her not to leave me, but the tube in my throat made that impossible. As they followed her out, Richard glanced back at me with an expression I couldn't read. They were gone for nearly 20 minutes. When they returned, Martha's face was pinched, Richard's eyes cold and calculating. They thought I was too drugged to understand, too weak to fight. They were wrong. $400,000, Richard hissed at Martha when they thought I was sleeping. "That's highway robbery for surgery. She probably won't survive anyway." "The doctor said the insurance would cover it if we sign as her legal guardians," Martha whispered back. "And what happens when they investigate?" "We don't have legal guardianship. We never filed the final adoption papers," Richard snapped. I felt the world tilting beneath me. What was he saying? They never actually adopted me. "Well, we can't pay it," Martha said firmly. "We'd lose everything." "If she dies," Richard said so quietly, I almost didn't hear him, "we're the beneficiaries of her estate as her parents. The inheritance would solve all our problems." "But what if they save her?" Martha asked. Richard's laugh was cold. "Look at her. Even if she survives, she'll be disabled. We can petition for guardianship of an incapacitated adult. Either way, we get control of her money." I kept my eyes closed, fighting the urge to scream around the tube in my throat. These people, these monsters, had raised me, tucked me in at night, celebrated my accomplishments. And now they were calculating the benefits of my death. A new voice entered the conversation, the doctor returning. Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery, have you made a decision? The surgery really is time-sensitive. There was a pause before Richard spoke. We've discussed it, and we need to be honest with you. Vanessa isn't actually our daughter. I forced my eyes open a slit, just enough to see the doctor's confused expression. I don't understand, she said. You're listed as her parents. We were in the process of adopting her when she was young, Martha explained, lying smoothly. But we never finalized the paperwork. Legally, we're not responsible for her medical decisions or bills. The doctor's face hardened. So you're refusing to authorize the surgery? We simply can't take on that financial responsibility for someone who isn't legally our family, Richard said, his voice dripping with false regret. Perhaps the state has programs for this situation. She could die without this surgery, the doctor said bluntly. Martha had the audacity to dab at her eyes with a tissue. We're devastated, of course. We've raised her as our own. But there are realities we have to face. I see, the doctor said coldly. In that case, I'll need to explore other options for Miss Turner's care. They left soon after, Martha kissing my forehead in a grotesque parody of maternal affection, Richard patting my hand and promising to check in tomorrow. They thought they were leaving me to die. They expected to return to claim their inheritance from my estate. What they didn't know was that a young nurse named Allison had been in the room the entire time, checking my IV, quietly witnessing everything, and she had recorded every word on her phone. I went to college with Vanessa, she told the doctor after my parents left. We weren't close friends, but I recognized her name. Those people are monsters. No one deserves to be abandoned like that, especially by their own parents. I tried to communicate with my eyes, my gratitude, my fear. Don't worry, Allison said, squeezing my hand gently. We won't let you die. And we won't let them get away with this. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of pain medication and desperate measures. The hospital administration was working to determine how to proceed without parental authorization for my surgery. My condition was deteriorating rapidly. The internal bleeding from my lacerated liver couldn't wait much longer. Allison took matters into her own hands. She found my phone in the personal effects bag and managed to unlock it using my fingerprint while I was semi-conscious. She located my emergency contacts and called my best friend Tara. Tara arrived like a hurricane, all 5 feet 2 inches of her, vibrating with fury when Allison explained the situation. They'd never officially adopted me. They'd left me to die. They wanted my inheritance. Those evil, soulless parasites, Tara spat. She'd never liked Richard and Martha much, always saying they seemed too perfect, like they're hiding something. How right she'd been. Tara immediately authorized the surgery and offered her credit card to cover the initial costs until the insurance situation could be sorted out. She's my family, she told the hospital administrator fiercely. More than those people ever were. I was wheeled into surgery 8 hours after my parents had walked out, leaving me to die. The procedure was complex and risky. There were moments when the surgical team nearly lost me. My heart stopped twice on the operating table, but somehow I survived. Recovery was slow and agonizing. Days melted into each other as I drifted in and out of consciousness. The breathing tube was removed after 5 days, allowing me to speak in a raspy whisper. The first person I talked to was Tara, who had practically moved into my hospital room. They tried to kill me, I told her, my voice barely audible. The car, the brakes, failed. It wasn't an accident. Tara immediately contacted the police. Detective Marcus Reynolds was assigned to the case, a serious man with thoughtful eyes and a deliberate manner. He interviewed me extensively, taking notes in a small leather-bound notebook. Your car has been examined by our forensic team, he told me during his 3rd visit. The brake lines were deliberately cut, a clean professional job that would cause them to fail after about 15 minutes of driving. I closed my eyes, absorbing the confirmation of my worst fears. My parents, I whispered. We're investigating all possibilities, Detective Reynolds said carefully. Do you know of anyone who might want to harm you? I told him everything. The inheritance, my parents' strange behavior, their financial troubles, their abandonment at the hospital, and their discussion of becoming beneficiaries of my estate. They never even legally adopted me, I added, still struggling to process that betrayal. My whole life has been a lie. Detective Reynolds nodded gravely. We'll look into all of this, Miss Turner. In the meantime, we've arranged for a police officer to be stationed outside your door. Your safety is our priority. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. Physical therapy was excruciating. Each small victory, sitting up unassisted, taking a few steps with a walker, was overshadowed by the emotional pain of my parents' betrayal. Tara and Allison were my rock's alternating shifts, so I was never alone. Allison had quickly become more than just my nurse. Her shift had ended hours ago the day she recorded my parents, but she stayed holding my hand through the night when the pain was at its worst. She brought me books smuggled in real coffee instead of the hospital's weak brew, and made me laugh even when it hurt my healing ribs. "Why are you doing all this?" I asked her one evening as she helped me wash my hair, the first time in nearly 3 weeks. Her hands were gentle as she rinsed the suds away. "Because everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and compassion," she said simply. "And because I think you're pretty amazing surviving all this." 2 weeks into my recovery, Detective Reynolds brought disturbing news. "We've discovered that your parents took out a life insurance policy on you 6 months ago," he said, placing a document on my bedside table. $5 million with them as the sole beneficiaries. I stared at the paper, nausea rising in my throat. 6 months ago, before I even knew about my inheritance. "It appears they've been planning this for quite some time," he confirmed. "We've also found evidence of significant gambling debts. Your father's investment firm has been failing for years. He's been misappropriating client funds to cover personal losses." I thought about all the times in recent years when they'd asked for loans for home repairs or to help friends in need, money that was never repaid. How many lies had they told me over the years? Had anything been real? The detective continued. "They've been calling the hospital daily, asking about your condition. The staff under our direction have been saying you're in critical condition, unresponsive. We think they're waiting for news of your death." "Let them wait," I said, a cold resolve settling over me. "Let them think they've won. Because when they come back expecting to claim their prize, I'll be ready for them." As my body slowly healed, my mind grew sharper, my determination stronger. I would not be their victim. I would fight back, and I would win. After 4 weeks in the hospital, I was stable enough to be moved to a private rehabilitation center. My physical recovery was progressing better than expected, though I still needed a wheelchair for longer distances and had limited use of my right arm. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about a full recovery given time and extensive physical therapy. My emotional recovery was another matter entirely. Nightmares plagued me. Visions of my car plunging off the road, of Martha and Richard standing over my hospital bed, with calculating eyes of fires consuming everything I loved. I started seeing a trauma counselor twice weekly, trying to process the magnitude of their betrayal. Tara had been managing my architectural firm in my absence, keeping clients updated and projects moving forward with the help of my small but dedicated team. She brought me drawings to review and decisions to make, giving me something to focus on beyond my injuries and rage. "Your parents called the office yesterday," Tara told me one afternoon as she unpacked the lunch she'd brought, real food instead of the bland rehabilitation center fare. "They wanted information about your business accounts, claiming they needed it for insurance purposes." "What did you tell them?" I asked, picking at my salad. "That all business matters were being handled by your lawyer while you remain in critical condition," she said with grim satisfaction. "They seemed very interested in whether you had a will." I had indeed updated my will the day after regaining consciousness, with Sam Weiss coming to my hospital room to finalize the documents. Martha and Richard had been removed as beneficiaries and executors, replaced by a trust that would fund programs for adoption reform and support for victims of family violence. I'd also filed a police report and restraining order against them. Detective Reynolds continued his investigation, building a case methodically. "We found something disturbing," he told me during one of his regular visits to the rehabilitation center. "It appears your parents have a pattern of suspicious financial windfalls following family tragedies." He spread several documents on the table beside my bed. "Martha's sister died in a car accident 10 years ago, brake failure remarkably similar to your accident. Martha and Richard were the beneficiaries of her life insurance policy. Her husband died 2 years later, apparent suicide, though there were inconsistencies in the investigation. Again, they benefited financially." I felt sick as I examined the documents. "Are you saying they've done this before?" "We're saying there's a pattern that warrants further investigation," he replied carefully. "We're reopening those cases." The most shocking revelation came from Tara's private investigator, who had been digging into my adoption records. There were no legal adoption proceedings, she reported, showing me her findings. The paperwork Martha and Richard claimed to have filed was never submitted. According to all official records, you remained Vanessa Turner ward of the state until you aged out of the foster system. But that's impossible, I protested. I went to school, had medical care, a passport. How could they have managed all that without legal guardianship? Falsified documents, the investigator explained. Your parents created a paper trail convincing enough for casual scrutiny, but nothing that would stand up to a thorough investigation. They essentially purchased you through a shady broker who has since been convicted of child trafficking in unrelated cases. The world tilted beneath me as one final horrible thought occurred to me. My biological parents' house fire, the one that killed them when I was 5. Detective Reynolds nodded grimly. We're looking into that as well. The timing is concerning. The fire occurred shortly after your maternal grandmother established a trust fund for you. The rehabilitation center suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in. Martha and Richard, these monsters who had raised me, might have murdered my birth parents to get to me and my trust fund. Had my entire life been built on such a foundation of evil? Later that week, exactly 7 days after my accident, Martha and Richard made their move. They arrived at the hospital where they believed I was still being treated, dressed in somber clothes, faces arranged in expressions of parental grief. According to the nurse who witnessed their arrival, Martha was actually dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue as they approached the information desk. We're here about our daughter Vanessa Montgomery, Richard said. We received a call that her condition has worsened. No such call had been made, of course. They were fishing, hoping to hear I'd finally succumbed to my injuries. The nurse, briefed by Detective Reynolds, played her part perfectly. Let me check on that for you, she said, making a show of typing on her computer. It appears Miss Turner was transferred to intensive care early this morning. The doctor will want to speak with you. Please have a seat. They waited for nearly an hour before a doctor approached them. Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery, I'm afraid I have difficult news. Vanessa's condition deteriorated rapidly overnight. She passed away at 4:37 this morning. Martha let out a theatrical wail, burying her face in Richard's shoulder. Richard, ever the practical one, moved quickly to business after a cursory display of grief. We'll need to make arrangements, he said. And there are estate matters to address. Of course, the doctor said sympathetically. The hospital social worker can assist you with the immediate details. I believe your daughter's lawyer has also been notified. Richard straightened at this. Her lawyer? Yes, a Mr. Weiss has been handling her affairs during her hospitalization. I understand he has her will and other important documents. Martha and Richard exchanged a look that the surveillance cameras captured perfectly. Alarm mixed with calculation. They hadn't anticipated this complication. The following morning, they arrived at Sam Weiss's office, dressed in expensive but appropriately subdued morning attire. Sam, who had been thoroughly briefed, welcomed them with professional courtesy. We understand you have Vanessa's will, Richard said after minimal preliminaries. Sam nodded solemnly. Yes, Miss Turner made some updates recently. I have those documents here. He removed a folder from his desk drawer. However, before we proceed, there's something she left specifically with instructions to be given to you in the event of her death. He handed them a sealed envelope with Martha and Richard Montgomery written on the front in my handwriting. Martha took it with trembling fingers. Perhaps you'd like some privacy to read this, Sam suggested, rising. I'll give you a few minutes alone. The moment the door closed behind him, Richard snatched the envelope from Martha and tore it open. Inside was the letter I'd written the night before my accident. The letter detailing my suspicions about their sudden interest in my finances, the evidence of their massive gambling debts, my discovery that they had never legally adopted me, and my decision to remove them from my will. I know what you've done, the letter concluded. I know what you're planning to do. By the time you read this, the authorities will have everything they need to ensure justice, for me and for my real parents. Your game is over. According to the hidden camera in Sam's office, Richard's face drained of color as he read. Martha grabbed the letter from him, her eyes widening with each line, her hands shaking uncontrollably. It's a bluff, Richard whispered hoarsely. She couldn't have known. We were careful. What do we do? Martha hissed. Richard, what do we do? Before he could answer, the door opened. Instead of Sam returning, Detective Reynolds entered, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Richard and Martha Montgomery, he said formally, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Vanessa Turner. and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. As they were being handcuffed, both protesting their innocence, I was wheeled into the room by Allison. The sight of me, very much alive, hit them like a physical blow. Martha actually fainted, slumping against one of the officers. Richard's face contorted with rage. "You," he spat. "This is all a misunderstanding, Vanessa. We can explain everything." "Save it for your trial," I said, my voice stronger than I'd expected. "I heard everything in the hospital. I know exactly what you planned, and now so does everyone else." As they were led away, I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a profound sadness for the family I'd thought I had, and a growing determination to reclaim my life and my truth. The weeks following Martha and Richard's arrest were a whirlwind of police interviews, legal consultations, and physical therapy. I moved in with Tara temporarily, while my home was modified to accommodate my ongoing recovery needs. Allison came by daily ostensibly to check on my medical progress, though we both knew her visits had become about much more than professional care. Detective Reynolds kept me updated on the investigation. The evidence against Martha and Richard was substantial. The doctored brake lines on my car, the life insurance policy, their recorded hospital conversation, their financial desperation, and most damning of all, their own words in Sam's office after reading my letter. "We've also reopened the investigation into your birth parents' deaths," Reynolds told me one evening as we sat on Tara's patio. "The original fire investigation was cursory at best. Modern forensic techniques have revealed traces of accelerant that were overlooked 26 years ago." I stared at the setting sun, trying to process this confirmation of my worst fears. "They murdered my parents to get to me." "We believe so," Reynolds said gently. "We've found financial records showing a substantial payment from Richard to a known arsonist 1 week before the fire. And there are records of Martha visiting your hometown 3 times in the months before the fire, likely scouting your family." "Why? Why would they do this?" "The trust fund your grandmother established for you was significant, nearly $1 million in 1999. With Richard's investment knowledge, they could control that money while posing as your loving adoptive parents. No one would question them." I thought about the years of bedtime stories, school plays, family vacations, all while living with the people who had murdered my birth parents. Had there ever been any real love, or was it all an elaborate performance to maintain access to my money? My thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Allison, who had become a constant, calming presence in my life. She carried a stack of photo albums she'd retrieved from my house at my request. "Looking for answers?" she asked gently, seeing the police files spread across the table. "Looking for truth," I replied. "I need to separate what was real from what was manipulation." I spent hours that night poring over family photos, searching for clues I might have missed. The smiles, the hugs, the celebrations, they all looked genuine. But now I saw the calculation behind Martha's eyes, the possessiveness in Richard's embraces. They weren't loving me, they were guarding their investment. The most painful discovery came when I found an old box of childhood memorabilia in my home office. Inside was a small worn teddy bear, the only possession I'd had from my life before the Montgomerys. Tucked inside the bear's threadbare vest was a folded photograph I'd hidden there as a child and forgotten about. A picture of me with my birth parents, Jack and Marie Turner, at a county fair. We were laughing, ice cream smeared on my 5-year-old face, their arms protective around me. I showed the photo to Allison, my hands trembling. "This is who they took from me, these people who truly loved me." Allison held me as I cried. Really cried for the first time since the accident. For my birth parents, for the little girl I'd been, for the decades of lies. "You survived," she whispered against my hair. "You survived what they did to you twice. That's not just luck, Vanessa, that's strength." The preliminary hearing for Martha and Richard was scheduled for the following month. I worked with the district attorney's office to prepare my testimony, recounting every detail of their behavior before and after the accident. The prosecutor, Angela Diaz, was confident. "We have them on attempted murder at minimum," she assured me. "With the insurance fraud and the evidence from your accident, they're looking at decades in prison. If we can definitively link them to your birth parents' deaths, they'll never see freedom again." Richard and Martha had been denied bail, deemed flight risks, due to the severity of the charges and evidence that they'd been preparing to leave the country. They'd been held separately since their arrest, unable to coordinate their stories. This proved to be their undoing. Martha, facing the possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison, began to crack under the pressure. She requested a meeting with prosecutors, indicating she might be willing to testify against Richard in exchange for a reduced sentence. I attended this meeting with Angela Diaz and Detective Reynolds, watching from behind a one-way glass, as Martha, looking decades older than her 62 years, entered the interrogation room. Gone was the perfectly coiffed hair and designer clothing. Gone was the mask of maternal affection. What remained was a desperate, frightened woman. "I never wanted to hurt Vanessa," she began, voice quavering. "The accident wasn't my idea. It was all Richard. He's always been the one to push things too far." "Let's start at the beginning," Angela suggested calmly. "How did you and Richard come to adopt Vanessa?" Martha twisted her hands in her lap. "We didn't adopt her. Not legally. Richard found her through a broker who specialized in arranging families for difficult placements. We paid $50,000. The broker handled the paperwork, fake documents that would pass casual inspection. And why Vanessa specifically? There were many children needing homes." Martha's eyes darted around the room, avoiding the mirror where she must have known I was watching. Richard had read about the Turner fire in Ohio. He knew the little girl who survived had a trust fund from her grandmother. He saw an opportunity. "Did Richard arrange the fire that killed Jack and Marie Turner?" Reynolds asked bluntly. Martha's face crumpled. "He said no one would get hurt. The fire was supposed to happen when no one was home. But something went wrong with the timing. It wasn't supposed to kill them." I gasped, my knees buckling. Allison, who had accompanied me for support, gripped my elbow to steady me. They had meant to destroy my home, not murder my parents. As if that made it better. As if that absolved them. "What about the accident 6 weeks ago?" Angela pressed. "The cut brake lines in Vanessa's car. Richard did that too. He's always been good with cars," Martha admitted. "I told him it was too risky, that there were other ways to get money. But he said we were out of options. Our debts were being called in. People were threatening us. And at the hospital, the decision to abandon Vanessa when she needed life-saving surgery, Martha had the decency to look ashamed. Richard said it was kinder to let her go quickly than to leave her disabled and in pain. He said with the life insurance and inheritance we could start over somewhere else. Pay off our debts. Have the life we deserved." "The life you deserved?" Angela echoed incredulously. "After murdering her parents, after raising her as your daughter while planning to kill her for money." Martha began to sob, the sound hollow and self-pitying. "I did love her in my way. She was a good daughter. Richard was the one who only saw the money. I just went along with it. I always just went along with him. I'd heard enough. I left the observation room needing air, needing distance from this woman's pathetic attempts to rewrite history." Allison followed me into the hallway. "She's lying," I said flatly. "Even now she's lying. She's just as guilty as he is." Allison nodded, taking my hands in hers. "The prosecutors know that. They're giving her rope to hang herself and Richard both. They won't let either of them hurt anyone ever again." Martha's testimony provided the final pieces of evidence needed to charge both Montgomerys with the murders of Jack and Marie Turner, elevating the case to capital murder in Ohio's jurisdiction. The web of their crimes stretched across decades: murder, fraud, child trafficking, attempted murder, insurance fraud, and a dozen lesser charges. As the legal machinery ground forward, I focused on my recovery, both physical and emotional. I worked with a specialized trauma therapist. I reconnected with my architectural firm. I explored the box of family mementos. Eleanor Turner had collected, learning about the birth family that had been stolen from me. And through it all, Allison remained by my side. First as my nurse, then my friend, and gradually something more. She helped me see that despite everything Martha and Richard had done, they hadn't succeeded in their ultimate goal. I was alive. I was healing. And I was finally reclaiming my true identity. Not as Vanessa Montgomery, the architect raised by loving adoptive parents, but as Vanessa Turner, survivor and architect of her own destiny. The trial of Richard and Martha Montgomery began 9 months after my accident. By then I had progressed to walking with only a slight limp, though prolonged physical activity still tired me quickly. My right arm had regained most of its functionality, allowing me to return to drawing and design work part-time. The courtroom was modern but intimidating. All polished wood and solemn authority. I sat in the front row beside Tara, with Allison on my other side holding my hand. Detective Reynolds and Prosecutor Diaz had prepared me thoroughly for what to expect, but nothing could truly ready me for the sight of Martha and Richard in prison jumpsuits looking haggard and diminished. Richard glared at me with naked hatred when he entered the courtroom. Martha couldn't meet my eyes at all. They sat at separate tables with separate defense attorneys. Their united front completely collapsed under the weight of mutual recrimination. The evidence presented over the next 3 weeks was damning and comprehensive. Forensic experts testified about the deliberately cut brake lines in my car. Hospital staff recounted my parents' abandonment when I needed life-saving surgery. Financial investigators detailed the Montgomerys' desperate financial situation, the insurance policy they'd taken out on me, and the pattern of suspicious deaths and inheritances throughout their history. Most compelling was the evidence linking them to my birth parents' deaths. Modern forensic techniques applied to preserved evidence from the 1999 fire revealed accelerant patterns consistent with arson. Bank records showed a $50,000 withdrawal from Richard's business account 1 week before the fire, followed by a cash deposit of similar amount to the account of a known arsonist who had since died in prison. When it came time for me to testify, I approached the witness stand with my head held high. I had decided not to use my cane that day, despite the pain, unwilling to show any weakness before the people who had tried to destroy me. Miss Turner, Angela Diaz began, "Please tell the court about your relationship with the defendants." For the next 2 hours, I detailed my life with the Montgomerys, the seemingly happy childhood, the gradual distance in my adult years, their sudden renewed interest after my inheritance, and finally their betrayal at the hospital as I fought for my life. I heard them discuss letting me die. I testified, my voice steady despite the pain of the memory. Richard said either my death or my disability would give them control of my money. Martha agreed. They left me there to die alone and in pain after raising me for 26 years. During cross-examination, Richard's attorney tried to suggest I'd misunderstood their hospital conversation due to medication and trauma. Martha's lawyer painted her as an unwilling participant manipulated by her domineering husband. I refused to be shaken. I know exactly what I heard, what I saw, what they did. When I finally stepped down from the witness stand, Allison squeezed my hand in silent support. Her steady presence had become my anchor in the storm of the trial and publicity. The most dramatic moment came during Richard's testimony. Unlike Martha, who had partially cooperated with prosecutors in a failed bid for leniency, Richard maintained his innocence, portraying himself as a loving father blindsided by false accusations. "We gave Vanessa everything," he insisted on the stand, his voice breaking in a performance of paternal devotion. "The best schools, vacations, her own business. We supported her dreams. Why would we harm our own daughter?" "She's not your daughter, is she, Mr. Montgomery?" Angela countered. "You never legally adopted her. You purchased her through a child trafficker after murdering her birth parents for access to her trust fund. Isn't that correct?" "Objection," Richard's attorney shouted. "Argumentative." "Sustained," the judge ruled. "Rephrase, counselor." Angela approached Richard slowly. "Mr. Montgomery, can you produce any legal documentation of Vanessa Turner's adoption?" "The paperwork was misplaced during a move years ago," he claimed smoothly. "But we raised her as our own from age 6. Any reasonable definition of parenthood—" "Let's discuss your parenting," Angela interrupted. "Why did you refuse to authorize life-saving medical care for Vanessa after her accident?" "We couldn't afford." You told hospital staff, and I quote, "She's not our real daughter," while refusing to sign insurance forms that would have cost you nothing. Why? Richard's composure cracked slightly. "That's not what happened. The hospital is twisting." "We have audio recordings, Mr. Montgomery," Angela reminded him. "Made by nurse Allison Parker, who was present during your conversation with Dr. Levine. She played the recording for the court. Martha and Richard's cold calculation of the benefits of my death versus disability, their discussion of the inheritance they stood to gain." Richard's face hardened as his own voice filled the courtroom. "That recording is taken out of context," he insisted when it ended. "Is it?" Angela approached the evidence table and lifted a plastic evidence bag. "Is this also out of context, Mr. Montgomery?" "The tool used to cut the brake lines in Vanessa's car, found in your garage with your fingerprints and traces of brake fluid, matching her vehicle's specific type." Richard's facade finally cracked, his face contorted with fury as he lunged forward in the witness box. "She was going to cut us off after everything we did for her. That money should have been ours. We earned it raising her all those years. The courtroom erupted. The judge hammered his gavel. Richard's attorney tried desperately to control his client. But it was too late. Richard continued his tirade, decades of resentment pouring out. We gave her everything, and she was going to leave us with nothing. That ungrateful little... Mr. Montgomery, the judge thundered. Control yourself or I will have you removed. Richard subsided, breathing heavily, seemingly unaware of the devastating admission he'd just made. Martha wept silently at her table, head bowed in defeat. After Richard's outburst, the outcome seemed inevitable. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with their verdict, guilty on all counts for both defendants. Richard and Martha Montgomery were sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole for the murders of Jack and Marie Turner, with additional consecutive sentences for the attempted murder and fraud charges. As they were led away, Martha finally looked at me, her expression, a complex mixture of remorse, resentment, and something that might have been genuine sorrow. "I'm sorry, Vanessa," she said softly as she passed. "For what it's worth, I did love you. In my way." Richard said nothing, his face a mask of hatred until the last moment. I didn't respond to either of them. Their words, whether of apology or hatred, had no more power over me. As the courtroom emptied, I remained seated between Tara and Allison, feeling not triumph, but a profound sense of closure. "It's over," Tara said, squeezing my shoulder. "Not quite," I replied. "There's one more thing I need to do." 2 days later, Allison drove me to Ohio, to the small town where I was born. I visited the graves of my birth parents for the first time, placing flowers on the simple shared headstone. Then I went to the county records office and legally reclaimed my birth name, Vanessa Lynn Turner. "What now?" Allison asked as we drove back to Philadelphia. I looked out at the passing landscape, feeling lighter than I had in months, perhaps years. "Now I build something new, something honest, something real." She smiled, taking my hand across the console. "I'd like to be part of that if you'll have me." "I was counting on it," I replied, squeezing her fingers gently. The future suddenly opening before us like an empty canvas, ready for a new design of my own making. 1 year after the trial, on a bright spring morning, I stood on a podium before a crowd gathered for the grand opening of the Turner Family Foundation. The modern glass and steel building gleamed in the sunlight, my own design incorporating elements that honored both sets of my parents, the warm wood accents my birth father had loved in his carpentry work, the abundant natural light my the portable-s birth mother had always sought for her painting, all within a structure as strong and resilient as I had needed to become. Today marks not just the opening of a building I began surveying the assembled guests, but the beginning of a mission to protect vulnerable children and reform a system that failed not only me but countless others. In the front row sat Allison, radiant in a blue dress that matched her eyes, and Tara, who had become the foundation's operations director after leaving her corporate job. Beside them were Detective Reynolds and Prosecutor Diaz, whose tireless work had brought justice not just for me but for my birth parents. The Turner Family Foundation had 3 main initiatives advocating for adoption reform and transparency, supporting children who had experienced family trauma and providing legal assistance to victims of family violence and fraud. My inheritance from Eleanor Turner, combined with a significant portion of my own savings, had funded the startup, with additional support pouring in from donors moved by my story, which had received national attention during the trial. "No child should ever be treated as a commodity," I continued. "No family relationship should be built on deception, and no one who has experienced such betrayal should have to recover alone." I had visited Martha in prison once 6 months after the sentencing, not for reconciliation. Some breaches can never be healed, but for my own closure. She had aged decades in those months, her carefully maintained appearance surrendered to institutional reality. "Why did you save all those mementos from my childhood?" I had asked her. "The artwork, the school projects, the photographs. If I was just an investment to you, why keep all of that?" She had looked at me with tired eyes. "Because you became more than that, Vanessa. It didn't start that way. You're right about that. But children have a way of making you love them even when you don't intend to." "But not enough to choose my life over money," I had said quietly. She had looked away then. "Richard and I made each other worse people over the years. Whatever capacity for goodness I might have had, he systematically destroyed. That's not an excuse. Just a truth I've finally faced. I never visited Richard. He had nothing I needed to hear. Now, as I continued my speech at the foundation opening, I found myself scanning the crowd for a particular face. She had said she would try to come this newly discovered relative who had reached out after seeing news coverage of the trial. There, in the back row, a woman in her 60s with my eyes and chin. Laura Turner Walsh, my father's younger sister. My aunt. Eleanor Turner hadn't been my only living blood relative after all, but Jack Turner had cut ties with his sister after a family disagreement, and she hadn't known about the fire or my survival until the Montgomery's trial made national news. Our reunion 3 months ago had been tearful and healing. Laura had brought family photos, stories about my father as a boy, memories of my mother's kindness. You have her smile, she had told me, and Jack's determination. I had finally found pieces of my true history connections to my past that the Montgomerys couldn't taint or steal. Laura had even introduced me to my cousins, her 3 children who had grown up never knowing I existed. This foundation stands as proof that even the darkest betrayals can lead to light, I told the audience, drawing my speech to a close. That family is defined not by blood or legal documents, but by love, honesty, and choice. My gaze moved to Allison, who smiled encouragingly. Our relationship had deepened gradually over the past year, built on mutual respect and genuine care. She had seen me at my most vulnerable and had never once made me feel weak for it. Instead, she had reminded me daily of my strength, my resilience, my capacity to rebuild. After the ceremony, as guests mingled at the reception, Tara approached with a small velvet box. "It came," she said excitedly. "Just in time." I opened it to reveal a simple gold pendant, a phoenix rising wings outstretched. My new personal symbol incorporated into the foundation's logo as well. Allison appeared at my side, slipping her arm through mine. "It's perfect," she said. "Like the woman who inspired it." Laura joined us, bringing her family to introduce. As we talked and laughed, I felt the final pieces of my new life settling into place. The Montgomerys had stolen my past, but they couldn't touch my future. That belonged solely to me and the family I was choosing to build. A family based on truth, respect, and genuine love. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, Allison and I walked through the empty foundation building, our footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floors. "How does it feel?" she asked, watching me closely. "Seeing it all come together like this?" I considered the question seriously. "Like resurrection," I finally said. "Not just surviving, but creating something meaningful from the ashes." She nodded, understanding as she always did. "Your parents would be proud. All of them." "Even Martha and Richard contributed in their way," I admitted. "Their betrayal taught me what family shouldn't be, making me all the more determined to help others recognize and escape such relationships." We stopped before the wall, where the foundation's mission statement was inscribed in brushed steel letters. "Family is truth. Family is choice. Family is love that protects rather than possesses." "I've been thinking about possession versus protection a lot lately," I said, turning to face Allison. "About the difference between wanting someone in your life because of what they give you versus wanting the best for them, even if it means letting go." She tilted her head, curious. "And what conclusion have you reached?" "That I want you in my life, not for what you give me, though that's considerable," I said, taking her hands in mine, "but because seeing you happy makes me happy. Because your joy matters to me as much as my own. Because loving you has taught me what real family feels like." Her eyes softened. "That sounds suspiciously like a forever kind of feeling." "It is," I confirmed, squeezing her hands gently. "If you'll have me." Her answer was a kiss that felt like coming home. Not to the false home the Montgomerys had created, but to something authentic and freely chosen. The letter that had saved my life, the one I'd written outlining my suspicions about Martha and Richard, now hung framed in my home office. Not as a reminder of betrayal, but as proof of my own instincts, my ability to recognize truth even when disguised by decades of deception. It represented the moment I had chosen to protect myself, to value my life, when others did not. Every life contains moments of choice, to trust or doubt, to surrender or fight to break or rebuild. Martha and Richard had chosen greed over love, possession over protection, deception over truth. Their choices had nearly destroyed me, but in the end had led me to a more authentic life than I might otherwise have found. My letter had changed everything, not just by exposing their crimes, but by marking the moment I reclaimed my power and my truth. Now surrounded by a family of choice and purpose, I was writing a new story. One where betrayal led not to destruction, but to creation. where near death gave birth to fuller life, where the inheritance that mattered most wasn't money but the capacity to recognize value and give real love. Have you ever had to completely rebuild your understanding of your life after a betrayal? How did you find the strength to trust again? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that even the deepest wounds can become foundations for a stronger future. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, the family that truly matters is the one you choose, built on honesty, respect, and love, that seeks to protect rather than possess.